Welcome to Computational Combat. We are looking at mixed martial arts fights through the eyes of a betting algorithm. I'm Dylan Grayson with the brains of the operation, Johnny Koppelman. Johnny, what are we doing here?
So basically, we got a model that's been trained using UFC historical data, and essentially what it does is it predicts probability outcomes, meaning it will give each fighter a probability of them being the victor. Over 1,000 fights that it had not seen, it came out 74% accurate. And over the past 14 cards, I think dating back to Ferguson Gaethje, I believe, when combined with a betting algorithm, it's around 23% profitable. So that's where, the algorithm is doing currently.
Okay, so today we're going to be taking a look at the card for this coming weekend, UFC Fight Night on Fight Island, Brian Ortega versus the Korean Zombie. And we're just going to be going through the algorithm's picks and then discussing how we feel about those picks and if we differ from the algorithm's opinion at any point. Is there anything else?
No, and also for the top two fights of the card, we're going to also give a little bit of significant stat differences because we know those two fights better than the others. So, yeah.
And then one last disclaimer, there are some fights that the algorithm hasn't touched. Johnny, why is that?
Because a lot of the fighters on this card, in some fights, one or the other one has either only had one fight or zero in the UFC, so we have no data.
Gotcha. Awesome. So we're going to dive right into that, look at the algorithm's picks, and let's get started. All right, so now we're going to be taking a look at the algorithm's picks for this card. 8 fights were covered by the algorithm. Johnny, what do you got for the bottom of the card here? Gadzhimurad Antigulov versus Maxim Grishin.
Yeah, so the algorithm's predicting, and we're going to keep this out of 10 to keep it simple, but around 6 fights out of 10, Antigulov comes out the victor on this for the specific fight.
Okay, awesome. I personally don't have much knowledge of either of these guys. I know Grishin came from the PFL, and Antigulov has a few fights in the UFC, but I really don't have much to add, so I'm going to be sticking to the algorithm when it comes to my bets. Fight number 7, Jamie Malarkey and Fares Ziam.
Yeah, so for this one, the algorithm has Malarkey as a pretty heavy favorite with 7 fights out of 10 approximately going to him being the victor. So that's a heavy favorite right there for the algorithm.
All right, same as the previous fight, in the pandemic era, the UFC calling on a few more of their underutilized fighters or guys from the regional scene, getting a few fights in over the summer, but haven't had much exposure yet. Now, moving on to number 6, Claudio Silva and James Krauss.
So for this fight, Silva, once again, a heavy favorite, coming out approximately 7 out of 10 fights being the victor, according to the algorithm.
Right, and for this one, I'm going to have to agree with that. Claudio Silva is an excellent jiu-jitsu player. He fights very rarely. There was one point where he had about a 3-year layoff. I actually got to see him fight live this past summer, pre-COVID. He was excellent. I expect him to beat James Krauss. As much as I do like James Krauss, probably the best nickname in mixed martial arts. He went by James Krauss when he fought in Japan, which is excellent.
I like that.
Krauss has been really good. He had a 3 or 4 fight winning streak snapped in his last fight. And as much as I do like Krauss, I expect Silva to get the win and probably by submission here.
All right, it sounds interesting to me.
All right, on to the next one, Jillian Robertson versus Pollyanna Battellio.
On this one, another heavy favorite, the second heaviest favorite on the night for the algorithm. Robertson comes out the victor with approximately 8 out of the 10 fights. She will win.
All right, I can see where that's coming from. Battellio doesn't exactly have the greatest difficulty of opponents. the best opponent that she's faced in the UFC was Cynthia Calvillo, and she lost by submission in that fight. Jillian Robertson has had a pretty up and down career, but I could definitely see her getting this one. All right. That leads us into the main card, Thomas Almeida versus Jonathan Martinez.
The algorithm has this one, Thomas Almeida, coming out approximately 6 out of 10 fights. It predicts that he would win. So a little closer.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about Thomas Almeida is that he had a really promising career, was a very hot prospect, suffered a few losses, and then he's been gone for a while. So it's been since January of 2018 was the last time Thomas Almeida fought. He's 21-3, and his only losses are to Cody Garbrandt, Jimmy Rivera, and Rob Font. Font being the weakest of those three, but
yeah,
Rob Font is definitely no joke. So I think that Thomas Almeida, if he doesn't have serious ring rust, is going to come back strong here against John Martinez, who is 12-3 in MMA. I don't know all that much about him, but knowing what I do know about Almeida, I expect an Almeida win here.
Yeah, and if we could take any example from a Nate Diaz or a Dominic Cruz, we could see that ring rust doesn't necessarily exist. We don't know. And that's where a place where it's interesting to see what the algorithm says because it's not taking that into account. So as far as ring rust, we'll see.
Right. I think that the bigger factor is what caused him to have the layoff there. Was it an injury? Is that injury still bothering him? Did he take time off for personal reasons? You know, these sorts of things might play into it. But if Thomas Almeida shows up, the same Thomas Almeida that was fighting 2-3 years ago, I think he should get the win here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next one, Jimmy Crute versus Modestas Bukauskas.
And this is coming in as the heaviest favorite of the card. Approximately 9 out of 10 fights, if they fought, it has Jimmy Crute coming out as the victor. What do you think about that?
So I really like Jimmy Crute here. Jimmy Crute is a very good, very young prospect. It always weirds me out when I'm the same age or close in age to UFC fighters.
Yeah, for sure.
He's just 1 year older than me. He's looked really, really good, both in the UFC and before coming to the UFC. He has a submission win over Paul Craig, which is pretty impressive considering how good Paul Craig is at jiu-jitsu. His only loss in the UFC was to Misha Serkinov. He got submitted with a Peruvian necktie. But he's 11-1. He's 24 years old. I think he's got a really good upside, and I really don't see him losing this one here.
All right.
All right, so now moving on to the top 2 fights on the card that we're actually covering. The co-main event is a heavyweight bout, but one of them is a last-minute replacement with no UFC fights, so the algorithm didn't cover that. So I'll talk about that briefly when the time comes, but these are the last 2 fights that the algorithm has actually looked at. So Caitlin Chikagian versus Jessica Andrade.
Yeah, it has this fight as a pretty close fight with I would say around another 6 to 5 out of the times they fight, Chikagian coming out as the victor. I'll give it to you to speak now, and we also have a little bit of statistics to go along with this.
Right. So here, I'm not sure exactly all of the mechanisms of the algorithm because you're the computer science and math guy, and I'm just a fan of mixed martial arts, but I totally disagree here. Jessica Andrade has been a killer at women's strawweight, so 115 pounds. And even for 115 pounds, she's small. She's 5'1.5", whereas Chikagian at flyweight, which is where they're fighting now, she's 5'9". That's going to give her a significant reach advantage and a significant leg reach advantage. Not that people talk about leg reach all that much. Chikagian also likes to kickbox at a distance. But all that being said, Jessica Andrade is the former strawweight champion. I think she's a stronger fighter. And before the UFC had a strawweight division, Jessica Andrade was fighting at 135 pounds. You know, so she was fighting people that were the same size as Caitlin Chikagian, and she was doing relatively well there. I just don't see Chikagian pulling this one off. She had a size advantage against Valentina Shevchenko. Didn't mean anything. The size advantage is obviously stronger here, but I think Andrade is going to win, and I think she's going to finish Chikagian here.
Yeah, and if you don't believe in the hot hand, kind of outlook, whereas if someone has a hot hand or a cold hand that affects their fight, then I don't see how you can't go Andrade here, because besides the 2-fight loss streak, she really takes the cake everywhere, including also she has 3 knockouts and 2 submission wins, and Chikagian has only ever won by decision and split decision. So if I'm a betting man, I'm seeing this fight play out. The only way this fight doesn't go the distance is if Andrade finishes somehow, either submits or knocks out Chikagian. And another pretty significant stat difference is as far as significant strikes landed per minute difference against their opponent, Andrade comes out with a positive 1.5 to Chikagian's 1 significant strike landed per minute differed from their opponent. And as far as total strikes landed differed from their opponent per minute, Andrade comes out with 2 and Chikagian with 1. So, and those are where they really differ the most across the board on a lot of statistics. Andrade again comes out as the victor with getting edged out and smaller attributes and stuff like that. But really, yeah, if I'm looking at this with human eyes, I'm picking Andrade.
Right. So I think that what you're trying to say here is that Chikagian gets hit for every hit she lands. Is that what the statistics are trying to say?
Well, actually, Chikagian hits her opponent 1 more time than she gets hit. But Andrade per minute. But Andrade hits her opponent for significant strikes 1.5 to 2, if you round up, times per 1 hit she gets. And for as far as total strikes, if she gets 1 punch to the face or body or wherever, she's given 2 back. Right. It kicks as well, total strikes in general. So Andrade edges out there as the favorite in those categories.
Right. Is there anything that you see that you think might have led the algorithm to choosing Chikagian, or is it something deep in there that you're not exactly sure of?
So I think it comes down to 2 things. I think, I left in the hot hand because I like the theory. I know a lot of statistics will tell you don't believe in the hot hand theory, but that's for betting and stuff where things are truly independent. This is fighting. You don't know what's independent, what's dependent. So I left it in. So I think the algorithm could either be going off of the loss streak for Andrade or the big height difference. I mean, that height difference, if you look, like this might be an anomaly where a huge height difference doesn't matter, but if you look historically in the UFC, the person with the longer reach is usually the person, who has a slight advantage. I think that's where it's coming down to. I also think it could be coming down to maybe as of now, the algorithm's not taking, if you hit your opponent 100 times and your opponent is terrible versus someone that hit their opponent 5 times and your opponent is one of the best in the world, it doesn't scale that as of now. So it could be that Chikagian might have, you would know this, but might have had a little weaker competition besides her 1 title fight. And that's why her statistics are a little bit inflated in some other places. But other than that, I don't, the human in me would have picked Andrade. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Right. And I do think that plays into it because Chikagian's last win was over Antonina Shevchenko, the sister of Valentina Shevchenko. So Valentina absolutely destroyed Caitlin Chikagian, and then Chikagian turned around and beat Antonina. But I don't think that Antonina Shevchenko is anywhere near the level of the last 2 opponents that Jessica Andrade faced, which is the current strawweight champion, Zhang Weili, and then former strawweight champion, current number 1 contender, Rose Namajunas. So the way I'm looking at it, I think this one definitely goes to Jessica Andrade.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that one.
All right. So just quickly looking at the co-main event, which the algorithm didn't talk about, Cyril Gane versus Ante Delija. So Delija is a last-minute replacement here, coming from the regional scene, moving up to the UFC to take on Cyril Gane. Cyril Gane's had a lot of hype because he's one of Francis Ngannou's training partners. He's undefeated at 6-0. He's got heavy hands. His last fight took a little bit of steam off of him because he went to decision after finishing so many people. He had a few knockouts. The fight before that, he had one with a heel hook, which I think surprised a lot of people. And
saw that, yeah.
And he has a decision win. But now we've seen that decision win age really well because that was Tanner Boser, who's now on a win streak, looking good, now ranked in the heavyweight division, I believe. But I expect Cyril Gane to walk through this guy. Not that he's a joke. Delija is 17-3, but I expect Cyril Gane to get that. All right, main event time. Brian Ortega versus the Korean Zombie.
This is another 6 out of 10 times they fight. or approximately 7, the algorithm predicts Ortega to come out as the victor. Dylan, I'll let you handle this. I think we both agree on our opinions here.
Right. So I do see a way that Ortega can pull off the win here, but I don't expect it. I think that the Korean Zombie will be getting the win here. Personally, definitely got the better striking, and his jiu-jitsu is world class. I know we talk about Brian Ortega as this excellent jiu-jitsu player, and he absolutely is. But at the very least, I don't think he's going to be able to successfully implement that game plan against somebody like the Korean Zombie, who's shown excellent jiu-jitsu in the past. You know, the first twister in UFC history. I just don't see Ortega's path to victory being as easy as Korean Zombie's here.
Yeah, and I'll agree with you there. And as far as opponents they face on resume, they have very similar resumes. So that it's going to be interesting to see them match up here because I think their stats are pretty honest about, matching up the two, considering their resumes. I have to say, Korean Zombie comes out as like a huge advantage in a lot of categories, and I'll get to that now. For every one shot the Korean Zombie takes, he gives back one more, right? For every one shot Ortega takes, or for every one shot Ortega gives, he receives 3. So that's a big difference there. He's negative. He gives for every one punch, he's receiving 3, and Korean Zombie, for every one punch he gets, he gives another one back. As far as total strikes landed, Korean Zombie, for every one strike he gets, gives 3 back per minute, and we're talking per minute here. And as far as Ortega, for every one strike per minute he gets, total strikes, for every one strike he gives, I'm sorry, again, it's a negative. For every one strike he gives per minute, he takes 4 back. So he receives a lot of hits here. He's coming out negative on a lot of trades in through his career. And then if you want to just go by how they're winning, Ortega has 3 knockouts, 3 submissions. Korean Zombie has 5 knockouts, 2 submissions. They both have 1 title fight, and they both have 20 rounds fought, which is interesting. They really match up pretty evenly as far as resumes go. But yeah, Korean Zombie really takes the cake with a lot of the key attributes.
Right, and one thing about the statistics is I think that Brian Ortega might be understated in the statistics a little bit, just because his most recent fight was against Max Holloway. This was a while back now, and he got an absolute beating there. And I believe Max Holloway broke the significant strikes record, either for the division or for the UFC as a whole at the time of that fight. So I wonder how those stats would look without the Holloway fight. But certainly I would think that that's what's influencing those striking differential numbers, because he got obliterated for 4 straight rounds.
Yeah, and I will say, as far as the, I would say less intuitive and not as easy to understand attributes go, such as clinch domination and ground domination, Ortega actually comes out. They're actually they're actually equal almost, but Ortega edges out by like a couple decimal places per each of those attributes. For a lot of the control time attributes, Ortega comes out on top, which is maybe why the algorithm gave Ortega a win. Again, I can't tell you why, especially because he doesn't even take the hot hand portion of this, because Korean Zombie, they both had a time in between this fight and the last fight, but Korean Zombie's coming off of 3 wins and Ortega's coming off of a loss. So.
Right, yeah. I think that if the Korean Zombie is going to win, he's going to want to keep it standing. Not that I think that he necessarily loses if he puts it to the ground, but I think that that's where Ortega is at his best.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see Ortega coming off of that loss, whereas, Korean Zombie coming off of 2 wins, and then that loss to Yair Rodriguez, which was a very interesting fight looking back at it, because the Korean Zombie was winning this 5-round fight. It was 24 minutes and 59 seconds. And then that ridiculous spinning back elbow knocked him out. Ever since coming back from mandatory military service in 2017, Korean Zombie has finished every single opponent he's faced, with the exception of Yair Rodriguez, who finished him with a second left. I like Korean Zombie. I think he wins this weekend, and I think he's going to get the title shot off of it.
Wow, I think that's a hot take. But again, he has a lot of hype behind his name anyway. So I do honestly think a win here, even against an opponent that's coming off a loss, can catapult his hype even higher to a title shot.
Right, and Dana White said the winner gets a title shot. I know you're not supposed to trust Dana White.
I don't trust it.
Quite often.
I don't trust it, especially for Ortega. I don't think Ortega gets a title shot if he wins this. Unless he wins in spectacular fashion. Yeah, exactly. And he just doesn't have the hype behind his name. A lot of the UFC, they're trying to sell tickets here. So you're going to give him a title fight off of a decision victory? I don't think so. If it's spectacular, maybe. We'll see.
Right. Yeah, so this is a very fun card, especially for one of those free on, or I say free, it's on the ESPN Plus app. So
you only have to get through one paywall for this one.
Right, exactly. For a non-pay-per-view card, I think this is absolutely fantastic. I think that this card is really fun. You've got guys like Cyril Gane that have a lot of hype. You've got Korean Zombie and Ortega in what may or may not be a title eliminator. I expect the simulated death of Caitlin Chikagian. And then one of the other things we didn't talk about super briefly, just on the prelims, Mateus Gamro was the KSW welterweight champion, I believe. Now he's coming to the UFC. That should be really interesting to see. He's facing another fighter with not too much exposure in the US, but that's another fight that's just absolutely fantastic. I think you're building these new prospects. I think you've got a really fun card the whole way through, and I'm really excited to see what happens.
Yeah, I'm excited too, especially because on UFC Fight Nights, the algorithm particularly performs a little bit worse than it would on pay-per-views, and I think that has nothing to do with I think that only has to do with the fact that some of these fighters are either really, really young or really, really old. So the stats are either too young or too old in the sense where, they'll have it's padded with a lot of losses or wins. So, but I'm interested to see how it performs, especially because this one's been buffed a little bit since the last version.
Right. So, Saturday night we'll tune in, we'll see what happened, and then we'll figure out how the algorithm did. And it's been a great discussion. And I don't know how to close out a podcast. Do you know how to close out a podcast?
No, I would just say if you think that your picks are better than ours, or you disagree with anything we said, besides, of course, statistics, tell us why. And because I'm truthfully interested, because I don't really know a lot about most of these fighters. So I'd like to see what other people think, if anyone's even has an opinion who's watching. But
right, absolutely. All right. Thank you.